And hello, fabulous students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Today we're going to talk about the causes of migration that is going on between 1750 and 1900. So, with all the new technologies and opportunities for employment going on in the world due to industrialization, this is going to lead to a lot of migration that is going to happen, and this will largely affect the world as we know it today. So let us begin. So one of the first things I need you to really know is that migration happens through labor systems. There's a couple of labor systems going on. You're familiar about slavery. Slavery is going on its way out, right? I mean, the last country to even sort of accept slavery and is going to be Brazil, and they're going to end slavery in 1888. And America did it, a couple of decades prior to that, and so the trend towards ending slavery is in full force in the 1800s, and Brazil will be the last in 1888. However, Africans will continue to enslave other Africans in Africa itself. Labor was still desired, so other forms of labor is going to be more emphasized. For example, indentured servitude will become very popular. Some did this to pay transportation to new countries with more opportunity. Other people used indentured servitude to pay off a debt or earn money for their families. Many stayed in countries after altering the culture and the demographics of that region. For example, we have Indians. They're going to go work in Mauritius, Fiji, Trinidad. These are areas which they're going to work through the indentured servitude labor system. And as a result, they're going to add a very strong Indian influence to these countries. And another labor system that's going to be around only for a short time, but it's called the Asian contract system or laborers. So Britain ended slavery in 1806. Still, they needed laborers because industrialization's in full force. And with industrialization, you got to have laborers. You got to have people to harvest all these crops and these raw materials, and so it was necessary. So between 250,000 to 500,000 Chinese were sent to East Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. 225 alone were sent to Cuba to work on sugar plantations under this Asian contract system. Asian contract workers were a substitute for the abolished slavery system, and treatment was harsh with low wages. It was called the new form of slavery, which was really resisted by the eyes of the world. They said, look, we just ended slavery. You kind of made your own little form. You resurrected it through a different way. You basically dressed it up a pig and called it a horse or whatever. So the practice of the Asian contract laborers is just going to gradually lose global support, and it will be ended around 1877. So another thing, if people are migrating across, another forced migration, if you will, is going to be through penal colonies. So after the British were kicked out of the Americas, which they were sending some of their convicts over there, they were kicked out of the Americas. They spent a lot of focus on Australia and New Zealand, mainly Australia to begin with, and they're going to start sending their convicts over there. So these are people who obviously are criminals, and the Britain systems are very packed, and they don't have enough room to fit all these criminals, and so they just created a penal island or colony, they call it, which is the island of Australia. And these convicts are going to work really hard. If they work so many years, they can earn their freedom back. Majority of convicts just stayed in Australia because it was nice. A lot of opportunity over there. 1850, Britain is going to stop sending convicts because it was no longer considered a punishment. People would actually get in trouble with the law so they can get free passage to Australia. They'd have to work for a few years or whatever, but then they could stay there and they'd have some opportunity. So voluntary migration, however, will begin to Australia in 1851. One of the things that's going to help spur it on is going to be the gold rush in Australia. So gold will be discovered. You'll also have like 50,000 Chinese who are going to come for the gold rush as well. In France, they're going to have a couple of penal colonies. They're going to have Africa, New Caledonia, French Guyana, and French Guyana is going to have a famous. Now, French Guyana is in South America, on the northeastern tip of South America, and they'll have an island called Devil's Island. It's going to become notorious for harsh treatment to its inmates. So in India, in 1883, Indians were sent to Mauritius. Now, Mauritius, as you can see on the picture over here, it's an island that's to the east of Madagascar. So it's closer to Africa than it is to Asia, obviously. A lot of indentured laborers are going to go to Mauritius and work on sugar cane plantations, and that's all due to replace the slavery that used to be done there. So remember, the laborers are still needed, but slavery is no longer morally accepted in the world, and so now they're finding a different type of system, and indentured servitude and Asian contract system are kind of filling that gap for now, that void. Many Indians signed 5-year contracts as plantation laborers in Guyana, Suriname, South Africa, Fiji, Caribbean. Many renewed contracts or stayed permanently in those regions, accepting land as either their payment or a lump sum as their payment, rather than getting money to get passage back home. So as a result, Indian culture is going to spread through these regions. So also in China, after the Opium Wars hit and the British and the French and other Western Europeans sort of claimed victory, it makes it a lot easier for Chinese to leave China because the government is becoming more and more ineffectual, the Qing dynasty over there. So many migrated to Southeast Asia as unskilled workers. This led to population explosion in coastal cities in Southeast Asia, like Singapore, for example. Many people migrated after the Taiping Rebellion. And if you remember the Taiping Rebellion, there was a lot of people who died as a result. 20 million due to poverty, due to flooding, to drought, to the bubonic plague came back and hit China again during that time. So you can see how a lot of Chinese just want to leave China, especially after a rebellion, that there's going to be so much suffering to the amount of 20 million who will suffer and die. Other Chinese left to the U.S. for a gold rush, as you know about the American gold rush. Also, while they were there, they started becoming a cog, a central cog, and creating and building the Transcontinental Railroad, connecting America from the east to the west coast. Chinese also migrated to Western Canada, America, South Africa, New Zealand. So we got lots of migrations happening. Another serious migration that has long-term impacts is in Ireland. And there's a couple reasons why the Irish immigrate. The main reason, obviously, is the potato famine, which we'll talk about. But I want to give you a few other ones. So politically, Ireland is going to get kind of incorporated into the UK of Great Britain and Ireland. It's going to become part of Great Britain, right? And that's not going to go well with some Irish. And another thing the Brits are going to do to the Irish is they're going to put some strict regulations on agriculture from Ireland to benefit the British. So you got these political things going. You have culturally, the Irish are largely Roman Catholic. and they're facing persecution during that time then from Britons who were Protestant. So you got religious persecution that becomes a factor. And of course, we have the environmental factor, which is the potato in Ireland, the one strand of potato pretty much that they use and grow, it became diseased with a blight, and it was the potato was inedible. People tried to eat them, even with the fungus, the black disgusting fungus that it covered because they were so hungry, but it usually just caused them to vomit and to have some serious medical issues. And so we have the potato, it is the major uh, staple food source of the Irish daily diet, and it largely consumed the overwhelmingly majority of their caloric or calorie intake. And so we have a country who became so largely dependent on the potato that when that potato and that particular strand of potato gets diseased, they're in big trouble. This led to the Irish potato famine, and it killed about 1 million people. As a result, we're going to see about 3 million Irish people migrating out of Ireland to the US, England, Canada, Australia, and I'd say the majority obviously went to the United States. So we got Italy also. There's migrations happening here. Remember, we talked about nationalism and Italy's unification along with Germany's unification under Otto von Bismarck. So under unification, unification usually comes by compulsion and force. Unification isn't, oh gosh golly people, let's all be friends. It's usually done through some force of sorts or some coercion. But unification in Italy happens. However, we have about 7 million Italians who want to migrate out of Italy during this time period. It could due to the unification, it could due to just poverty or just more opportunity. All that can be a factor, but they're going to go to places like North and South America, Australia, New Zealand. Argentina received many Italian industrial workers during these 4 decades of migration from 1861 to 1900. Many Italians left due to political and economic reasons. Let's go to Argentina now. So Argentina was the informal British Empire. They always say that the crown jewel of the British Empire was India. However, many have made the argument that Argentina would be a better crown jewel due to the amount of people and the quality of people that were migrating there because of all the opportunity that was available. So unlike most immigrants trying to escape poverty and oppression, many British that migrate to Argentina are like businessmen, bankers, engineers. These aren't people who are destitute looking for a new start. These are people who have a lot of money, who have a lot of talent, and are looking for a place in which they can expand all that, right? It's a different mentality to migration rather than we're poor and we want to go to a country where we won't be as poor. So these people coming, they're going to build railroads. They're going to import luxury goods that appeal to the growing middle class, etc. So we have technical experts that are also going to get migrate around the world. Many British settled in colonies like India, South Africa on official business. So many people left because it was part of their job. You know, maybe they worked for the British government, the British crown, and they needed to be a governor over in India or an officer or whatever. So we have this idea called colonization service. And so soldiers, government officials, managers, etc., they're going to settle in the colony that they were sent to by their mother country. So this is going to cause many engineers and geologists to emigrate to colonies to build infrastructure like roads and railroads and bridges and other improvement projects. These workers will combine Western knowledge with the experience of the native engineers from those colonies. And so as in this picture, of course, you see a railroad, you see a beautiful bridge that was built. These are things all engineers and geologists and things were able to sort of bring about in the colonies of the mother countries. And Japan is also going to see a lot of migration. So there's going to be a lot of overseas things because Japan, again, they want to modernize and become this powerhouse. They want to create this overseas empire. So they're going to establish something called the Colonization Society, which will largely fail, especially in Mexico, but we'll get to that. So what Japan wanted to do is, look, we're on an island and we have a surplus of people. What if we sent these people away to go work on sugar plantations, for example, in other countries, and then Japanese will slowly sort of, I don't want to say infiltrate, but will start, getting more and more popular and building more and more presence in other regions in the world that they were looking forward to becoming more of a dominant force. So obviously they were unsuccessful, especially in Mexico. However, there were Japanese migrations that happened because of this. In Hawaii, we have agreement that both governments, Japanese and Hawaiian government, agreed to allow 29,000 over the space of time, 29,000 Japanese to work on sugar plantations under a contract of 3 years. 970 Japanese went to Peru in 1899 for contract work. Remember the Asian contract we talked about? And in the U.S., you're going to see a lot of Japanese go to like the major port cities on the West Coast, such as San Francisco, Portland, Seattle. So as a result of Japanese and Chinese sort of migrating, you're going to kind of see a growing tide of anti-immigration sentiment towards the Japanese and the Chinese. So let's summarize a little bit of what we talked about here today. So because of the nature of new modes of transportation like railroads, steamships, etc., both internal and external migrants increasingly relocated to cities. Okay? Also, these new methods of transportation allowed for many migrants to return periodically or permanently to their home societies. Remember that people were able to migrate, even if their minds was just for a brief time, because the technology was available where they could, in a few years, go right back home. Some of them weren't leaving right away, never to come. They found a life wherever they went, and they decided not to go, many of them, but they could go. So many individuals chose freely to relocate, often in search for work during this time. The new global capitalist economy continued to rely on coerced or semi-coerced labor migrations, as we talked about, indentured servitude, Asian contracts, including slavery. Okay, slavery was still happening in the 1800s, although it was slowly losing steam. And Chinese and Indian indentured servitude and convict labor also played a part. Don't forget about the Asian contract labor as well. And that's pretty much it. So go ahead and write your one-page summary, and we'll talk when we get back. Thanks. Bye.